Hey, welcome back! Today we're going to talk a little bit about the famous Christmas story, A Christmas Carol, by Charles Dickens. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the literary qualities and aspects of the story. Dickens is, of course, the Victorian writer who pours a lot of the same kind of romantic character traits that we see in Victorianism. There is heavy emotion, there is a focus on the value of the individual. There is a fear of the sort of stuffy old elites and a love of the poor and the downtrodden, the working class. All of those things are very common within Victorian literature. And the entire story is pretty much just a sermon in how to treat your fellow man, how to be kind to others, especially those who are not as well off as you. Ebenezer Scrooge becomes the type figure of the grouchy, old, rich elitist who has everything and hoards it and holds on tight to it, but can't be bothered to help the poor and the needy. And his arguments that the poor should just go to prison or to the workhouses, and if they don't want to do that, then they can just die and decrease the surplus population, gets repeated back to him until he begins to feel the hollowness of it. And although the story does occasionally get a little bit didactic and preachy, it definitely covers for this by including elements of humor as well as heartfelt sentiment. And all of them together make such a delightful story that it's easy to enjoy in Christmas time. The story includes, of course, several ghosts and spirits who visit Ebenezer Scrooge to try to change his thinking on the world. He's a selfish, bitter old man who has cut off all of his relationships and become very cold-hearted. And so he's visited by the ghost of his partner, who then sends three spirits: the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future, to show him both the true meaning of Christmas and also what will happen to him if he continues on this dark, cold, friendless path. And so ultimately his heart is changed, and he becomes very generous and kind to those around him, and he finds great joy in helping others. Although the story is full of ghosts and spirits, the spiritual aspects of the story are more metaphorical. Most of these spirits are more symbols of ideas. And in fact, we see even some rather strong allegorical elements from time to time, like the two terrifying children under the robe of the ghost of Christmas present, who represent ignorance and want. And we have these sort of allegorical type figures that teach Scrooge a moral lesson. There isn't so much of a religious spiritual aspect to this story, even though it is a Christmas story. The symbolism and potential allegory extends even to Ebenezer Scrooge's name. The name Ebenezer means rock of help, which is an interesting idea. It's often connected with spiritual themes, but in this particular case, Ebenezer Scrooge should be and could be a rock of help, a place that people turn to for support and help, but he isn't. He ought to be, but he refuses to help anyone but himself. He seeks after only gain with a capital G, as his earlier fiancée pointed out to him in the past. And it's not until he recognizes the blessing of helping others that he then can become the true rock of help that he is supposed to be. The structure of the book is also a lot of fun. It is called A Christmas Carol in prose. So it is a song, but instead of being a song, it's told as a story. Now, Christmas carols are there to teach us and to fill us with the Christmas spirit. And that's what this story's intent is as well. It's divided into 5 sections, each called a stave. And a stave is a verse. So it's more or less like each of the sections are a separate verse of a song. And so similar to some of the other Christmas carols that tell a story, a moral story, this one too teaches us a moral story through its 5 staves. I also find it fascinating that it is a discourse between 3 voices against 1 counter voice. And that's a structure that shows up in a lot of other works of literature. For example, in the Iliad, in Book 9, 3 of the people come to Achilles and try to talk him into returning into battle. Another version of this structure shows up in the biblical poem of Job, where Job has to have an argument with 3 of his friends who all discuss the nature of Job's suffering. This structure allows for a slow progression of ideas, and a development from three different points of view in an argument. Some of the elements that make this story so compelling and fun are the fact that it is a kind of quest story, but a little bit ironic, in that a normal quest story starts with potentially a reluctant hero. Often the heroes at the beginning of a quest are reluctant, but as they go through their experiences, they grow and they transform and they change. However, the detail that is a bit ironic about all this is that the traditional quester is a younger man who has not yet come into manhood, whereas Scrooge is quite the opposite. He's lived through manhood and has become this calcified and hard-hearted adamant, and he needs to be returned to a kind of childhood. Over and over throughout the book, when we see different scenes of Christmas, we are reminded that Christmas brings out the child in us. At the party at his nephew Fred's house, they celebrate Christmas with all of these childish games, and the party emphasizes that Christmas makes us children again. When Scrooge finally wakes up after all of this event and he realizes that he has another chance and he has the opportunity to change, he calls himself a very baby because he has woken up new and doesn't even know what day it is anymore. And so, although he is an old man and has lived this life, and not a very good life, he now has a chance to be reborn, which is the redemption idea, but also to choose a new kind of life, where he will live as a good person. So he is given the chance just like a young person would. The old man who returns to become a baby is just one of the many contrasts created by this book. It's full of tensions between two opposite ideas. The rich pride of Scrooge at the beginning versus the poor humility of Bob Cratchit. The cruel hard-heartedness of Scrooge versus the cheerful goodwill of his nephew. And on throughout the book. These tensions are used to create humorous situations and jokes, but they're also used to create moments of profound thought. And they offer Scrooge the choice between goodwill and cruel selfishness. And by extension, they offer that same choice to us, and remind us what we need to do to be happy in life. The choice is a powerful one, because there are real consequences to constantly being selfish. In a kind of Dantean contrapasso, the ghost of Jacob Marley is forced to bear the chain that he forged in life and carry it through the afterlife. Scrooge himself will have a much worse chain when he dies, unless he goes out while he's living and does good to those who need him. Not only is there a consequence and pain in the afterlife, there's also one in the current life. Scrooge, although he gets everything he wants, is truly miserable. The person who sees this the most clearly is his nephew Fred. Fred frequently comments about how he pities Scrooge. Although the man is rich and has everything that he could possibly grasp at, he has no love, no cheer, and no happiness. And so he walks through life in absolute misery. In contrast to this, we see the idea that true happiness comes from caring for and helping others. In the final stave of the story, as Scrooge begins to go out and do good to others and wish others a Merry Christmas, he discovers absolute happiness. The book says, "He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted the children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of the houses and up to the windows and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness." And it's a profound lesson indeed. If we want to truly be happy, we need to stop looking at ourselves and start looking at others. Start loving and serving and being kind towards all those around us. So I hope as you enjoy this holiday story and other holiday stories, that you remember the power of giving to others and loving other people. Have a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thanks so much for watching. You can click to subscribe or to watch another video. I have me reading each of the staves of The Christmas Carol if you'd like to listen to me read it. You can also go to my Patreon for other resources. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.